Good morning, everybody.
Good
Morning.
I have to take slight exception to Mr. Smith's introduction because the title to my talk isn't a higher power. It's a higher power?
It's a question.
It's a question.
It's a question. Yeah.
As a prelude to that, I want to share with you one of my little dirty secrets, is that I love to show this old house. And I've probably been watching it for the entire 40 years it's been on. So
Yeah.
the new season this year is taking place out in Paradise, California, which you may recall from the news burned down a couple of years ago. And as part of their introduction to the work they're going to be following for the next few weeks, they were talking about the experiences that so many of the people had that brought them to this place. And they were talking about how people were being directed to a parking lot that was big enough to house or to hold them and kind of keep them away from the fire. And the parking lot was called the safe space. So as people were coming into town, you know, in a little panic, trying to get away from the fire all around them, the firemen were directing them toward this space because it was large enough. They figured even if the fire came to the very edge, they would be safer there. And there were a couple of small buildings there that were cinder block with metal roofs, so they figured worst case scenario, they could all get in there and probably have a better chance of survival. And all things are relative, aren't they? Because what they were calling a safe space had on one of its perimeters the propane tank farm for the town,
Oh,
which is where all the trucks come to refill their propane tanks
wow.
and take it out to the outlying areas to deliver to the various homes and whatnot. And on the second perimeter was a gas station. And on the third perimeter was an ammunition dump.
What?
And they were calling this
Safe
a
space.
safe space in a fire. So all things being relative, the fire was so bad that this was considered safe. We have these events in our lives where we sometimes have to make some really horrible choices. Because the thing that is so bad is worse than the next worst thing.
And the next verse.
You know, normally you wouldn't want your children camping out next to a propane fire or a propane tank in a fire, but it's better than being in the fire, isn't it?
Yeah.
So, in the same way, we talk about a higher power. And in New Thought teachings, we refer to a higher power a lot because so many people come to New Thought through one of the many 12-step programs that are out there to help people who have discovered that their way of life is no longer sustainable, and they've come to one of these programs to help them reboot, as it were, to recognize that whatever they've been addicted to is no longer serving them and they want a way out. And a higher power was a term that came about as a way of being neutral because so many of these people are afraid of the word God. Because in their experience, the whole God concept has been an absolute failure in their life. Where has God been in my life that I have been living homeless for the last 6 years? That I've been addicted to drugs for the last 12 years? That I've been addicted to whatever I've been addicted to and unable to sustain what society describes as a normal existence. Having some sort of permanent residence, having some sort of income that I can count on, having some sort of way to contribute to society rather than literally being considered a pariah. And people that finally bottom out or are drawn into these programs, but they're not really friendly with the term God because in their life God has abandoned them. So we find different terms to kind of bring them into the concept of the power of love as we know it in this teaching, without using a word that immediately sends them running.
Oh.
And I know a higher power appealed to me for a long time as something more sustainable than God. I later learned that I could call it Fred. It worked the same way. Because quite frankly, God doesn't care what you call it, the God power. And so, you know, some of my favorite comedians do the same thing. They find words that we're so used to hearing and they start asking questions about it. So I thought, I'm questioning this higher power concept. Why do we call it a higher power? After all, we are all expressions of this one power. This loving energy that just is everything. And why do we call it? Say that because first thing we say about, well, what is it? It's infinite. Okay, if it's infinite, it's everything.
Mm-hmm.
We're part of it. It can't be higher than us because we're part of it. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
In spirit, we are all equal. In spirit, we are all equal. We are all created of it. And since we are of it, we are it. We are equal with it. There is no higher power, only the one power. Now, why is there such a confusion? The one power has no wants. We do. The higher power has no ego. We do. The one power has no agenda. We do. The one power has no opinion. Well, none of us has an opinion. Am I the only one? Okay. The one power has no judgment. We do. When we project out into the universe that we demand a certain thing to be true, if it is in compliance with the truth, that thing will come to pass. If we see ourselves as fully engaged in society, if we see ourselves gainfully employed, comfortably housed, in relationships that prosper us and comfort us, these things come to pass. As long as we don't push the river, as long as we don't force it to happen a certain way, as long as we don't say it has to be that job, that person, that house. If we allow ourselves to simply be open to our truth that we're going to be comfortable today, we're going to be valuable today, things are going to open up for us that allow that to happen. Job opportunities will present themselves. Housing opportunities we never imagined will present themselves. I don't know what your personal experiences are, but I can tell you what my personal experience is in this regard, because I was born a mystic. I didn't know it at the time. I later learned what mystics are and realized, oh, I'm that. And what a mystic is basically a person, as we heard earlier, that lives this life intuitively. Didn't have to learn it. There's nothing wrong with learning it. It's okay to wake up later on in life and learn it. I recognize as I look back, I've been having these experiences all my life. Every time I get out of my own way, stuff happens. Good stuff happens. I move into an area and I devote myself to finding an apartment. And I have in my mind what that perfect apartment is going to look like. And I look for it, and I look for it, and I look for it, and I look for it. And then suddenly, somebody comes along and says, oh, by the way, I know a guy.
Yeah.
Somebody always knows a guy.
Yeah.
And then you go, well, that's not really what I'm looking for, but I'll check it out. And you go in and it's like, oh, I wasn't even thinking about this. This is fantastic. And look, it's got one of those. I didn't even know I wanted one of those, but it's got one. And it's half the price I was willing to pay.
Yeah.
This is okay. That happens when I get out of my own way. My friend John Bigelow writes in We Are More, could a person, as a mystic, fall back into their ego? Of course. This fall is not something done to us by some higher power, as if somehow we have fallen out of favor or fallen from grace. It is simply the energetic response to that, to the largest degree, we place on ourselves, for we alone are responsible for our creations. There is no bearded man pointing his finger at us saying, you did bad, and I am not going to let you get away with it. We take that burden on ourselves. When our hearts tell us we're on the wrong path, we start to struggle. We start to feel wrong inside. We start to feel guilty. Not because some higher power is passing judgment on us, but because we recognize internally that we are not on the right path. No, we're not even on a path. We've just stumbled into the wilderness. There is no path that's right or wrong. There is a path and there is wilderness. Thomas Trower writes in his lectures, we must next realize that the mind itself is an organism which is in like manner, and pardon me, he goes on and on, he doesn't know what a period is. The sentences go on for pages, so. Which in like manner adapted to the action of a still higher power, only here the adaptation is one of mental faculty. As with other invisible forces, all we can know of the mind is by observing what it does, but with this difference, that since we ourselves are this mind, our observation is an interior observation of states of consciousness. We are this power. We're simply an expression individualized of this loving power, this energy. As we observe internally, as we feel our missteps, we create a judgment and hopefully a course correction. That's what those little pangs are for. They're the little pangs that say, you're a little off course here. One of my teachers used the example of a guided missile. All a guided missile does is recognize what direction it's supposed to be headed in. And when it drifts off of that direction, there's a little sensor in it that says, that's not the way you're supposed to be going. And it kicks the rudder over a little bit to put it back in the direction it's supposed to be going. That's all we need to do with ourselves. When we sense we're not headed in the direction that we know that our truth is taking us in, just give yourself a little kick. Let that rudder kick over a little bit and put you back on course. The missile is not designed to fly in a straight line. It's designed to keep correcting its course. We're human beings. We get to wiggle once in a while. I was going to mention the Super Bowl halftime show, but some wiggles are good. Ernest Holmes writes, Living the Science of Mind, excuse me. The truth which sets us free is not the introduction of some higher power on a lower plane. It is the knowledge that there are no higher and no lower planes in truth, no higher, no lower laws in truth. There is merely what is and the self-action of what is proclaiming itself to be that which it is. There are no good laws and bad laws. There are laws. I'm not talking about the judicial system, I'm talking about spiritual. We stick to those principles all the time. As one of my teachers used to say, we do not sacrifice principle even for a good cause.
Mm.
That's a tough one sometimes. We stick to the principles of truth. We stick to the principles of love and joy all the time. Even when someone does us wrong, we spiritually need to stick to those principles and love. Some call it forgiveness. Just call it love. If you don't create a judgment in the first place, there's nothing to forgive. Simply love that person. You don't have to agree with them, but try to stay out of the gutter. Holmes writes again, at the center of our being is the real creative power. The question is whether we are living from this center, or whether we are thinking of ourselves as detached, separated, divided, alone, and inadequate. We all have direct access to the infinite presence, the universal person. There would be no more beautiful thought than that the divine spirit itself, infinite as it is also within us, reminding us again, we're simply part of it. There are no higher truths. There's only truth. There is no higher power. There is simply the power of love and our choice to embrace it, to make it our guiding North Star, the principle that we cannot vary from. To remind ourselves that the power doesn't flow into us, it flows from us. That we are simply conduits of the loving energy that is this universal power. If you don't like the word God, call it Fred. It's the same thing. It's the energy that gets us out of bed in the morning. It's the direction that takes us out into the world every day. It's the impulse that says, oh look, an empty potato chip wrapper floating across the parking lot. I'll pick it up and put it in that trash can. Why? Because it's offending me, and it would be a prettier world if it weren't there. And nobody's going to pay me to do it, but I'm going to feel better about it because no one else will have to be insulted by this thing that doesn't belong here. I used to tell my guys at one of the properties I managed, as you're going around, if you see something on the ground that wasn't put there by God, pick it up. I don't care if it makes you feel better, it'll make me feel better and I'm your boss. I like to think that the power of love, well, again, no opinion, right? Couldn't care less if there's an empty potato chip wrapper blowing across the parking lot. But it probably appreciates that we appreciate a nice, clean, clutter-free environment. Only because it's a healthier place for us as little human beings running around to live in. Again, the power, couldn't care less. As the great American philosopher George Carlin once said, one day, 1,000,000 years from now, it'll be the planet Earth in plastic bags, the Earth will be just fine. But for us today, I think we all appreciate a less littered environment. I think we all appreciate a little less clutter in our lives. I think we all appreciate knowing that beauty and peace and joy are products of our own making, because they already exist in spirit, and all we have to do is allow them to exist from within us, and release the idea that we are being watched over and judged by some higher power. It's an inside job. It's an inside job. It is us. We are that power. We are the power. Embrace it. Enjoy it. Be it. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.